I came home earlier than usual, the kind of early that still carries a gray sliver of daylight across the driveway enough to make everything look normal, even when nothing is. I remember thinking only about reheating leftovers and falling into bed completely unaware that within the next few minutes, the ground beneath my life would shift in a way I could never return from. The first sign was the front door. It was cracked open barely, like someone pushed it but never cared to close it. My parents were obsessive about locking doors, especially Elaine. She could not sleep unless she heard the click of every latch in the house. Seeing it ajar was like seeing a seatbelt unbuckled mid-flight. I pushed the door with 2 fingers, slow and careful, and slipped inside. The house held its breath. No TV, no clinking dishes, no footsteps. Just a faint murmur coming from the dining room, not loud enough to be conversation, but sharp enough to raise the hair on my arms. I stepped deeper into the hallway. That was when I recognized the voices, Elaine's sharp tone and my father Richard's barely there responses. They were not arguing, which would have been normal in a dysfunctional home like ours. They were planning, scheming. Their voices sharpened as I grew still. Then I heard the sentence that punched the air out of my lungs. She will marry him whether she wants to or not. The words froze me in place. My mind reached for any other explanation, but there was none. Elaine's voice carried the finality of a verdict, like she was declaring a fate rather than discussing a daughter's life. Richard answered with hesitation, almost whispering, "Sarah fought back last time. Last time." My jaw tightened. Elaine immediately cut in. Then she will learn not to. And then something shattered. A glass. The sound burst through the silence, sharp as a warning shot. I flinched, gripping the strap of my bag. Elaine had a habit of hitting objects when she wanted to make a point. Never people not directly because she liked damage that could be denied. But objects, especially mine, were fair game. And suddenly, memories I tried to bury rose like steam. A flashback hit me without mercy. Elaine locking my bedroom door from the outside when I was 17 because she disapproved of the friends waiting for me at the end of the street. I had been changing clothes preparing to leave when she stepped in, grabbed my phone, and said I was grounded for being disobedient. Then she shut the door, locked it, and walked away as if she had simply closed a cabinet. She kept me inside until I stopped crying. She called it discipline. I called it what it truly was: control. The memory faded as I forced myself back into the present. My hands trembled, but clarity started to settle in my mind like a cold layer of ice. I slowly slid my phone from my pocket, tapped the screen once, and started recording. Their voices sharpened again. Elaine's tone cut through the air like a blade. "If she resists, we will take her car. She needs us. She has nothing without us." Richard sighed weakly, but he did nothing to stop her. He never did. My breathing grew shallow, but not from panic. Something else was forming inside me. Something steady. Quiet. A kind of strength that comes not from confidence, but from exhaustion. From years of being pushed, silenced, redirected, shaped, reshaped, diminished. Elaine kept pacing through the dining room. Through the small gap in the doorway, I saw her silhouette, moving with precision, her hand slicing through the air as if she were conducting an orchestra. She was always at her most dangerous when she was calm. Richard sat with his shoulders curved inward, rubbing his forehead as if the pressure behind his eyes could shield him from the truth of what they were plotting. Their conversation continued, each word more surreal than the last. "We will present it at dinner on Sunday. Everyone will be there. She will not embarrass us. She knows what happens if she does." My stomach flipped, not because of the threat, but because I suddenly understood the shape of everything. This was not about marriage. This was about power. This was about Elaine finishing what she spent 15 years building. A world where she decided who I could be, where I could go, who I could love, what choices counted as mine. My fingers tightened around the phone. They thought I was still the girl who apologized for existing. The girl who sobbed behind locked doors and believed she caused the storms around her. The girl who lowered her voice so Elaine would not raise hers. But the person standing in that hallway no longer resembled the girl they believed they controlled. A steady calm washed over me. My heartbeat slowed. The trembling faded. I stepped back from the dining room doorway, slipping toward the exit with silent, deliberate movements. When I reached the front door, I paused just long enough to breathe. Outside, the air felt colder, cleaner, as if crossing the threshold placed me into a different version of the world. I walked toward my car, not running, not panicking, just walking with a sense of purpose that surprised even me. I knew what I had heard. I knew what they were capable of, and I knew what I needed to do next. That night, something inside me shifted permanently. I stopped being their daughter. I became their target, and they became mine. I grew up believing that families were supposed to be complicated, that chaos was simply part of the structure, that tension and control disguised themselves as love more often than not. My mother passed away when I was 10, long before I had the emotional language to understand grief, and only long enough to remember the softness in her voice when she said my name. After she died, it was just me and my father for 3 quiet years. Then Elaine arrived, stepping into our lives with a polished smile and a presence that filled every corner of the house, whether anyone wanted it or not. She married my father fast, too fast, before anyone could process the shift. My father seemed relieved, more than happy, like the responsibility of raising a daughter alone had worn him down, and Elaine offered an escape. At first, I tried to welcome her. I wanted a mother figure again, someone who could help me braid my hair, someone who would sit in the audience at school events, someone who might love me even a fraction of the way my own mother had. That hope died quickly, maybe within the first month. Elaine came with rules spoken and unspoken. She believed children should be obedient, silent, grateful. She believed girls, especially girls who were not hers, required shaping, taming, correcting. The first time she raised her voice at me, my father was standing right there. I had forgotten to fold a blanket on the couch. Just a blanket, nothing more. Elaine's eyes narrowed, her lips thinned, and she said my name like it was an offense. She snatched the blanket, folded it with sharp movements, and dropped it onto the sofa. My father laughed awkwardly, brushed it off, told me to listen to her. "Obedience keeps peace," he said, but peace never came. Little by little, Elaine replaced every soft part of the house with something rigid and cold. My room became a place she inspected rather than respected. My belongings became things she evaluated. Even my voice became something she monitored. The micro-violence grew roots quietly. One afternoon when I was 17, I came home holding an envelope I had been dreaming about for months. A letter from a college I had applied to in secret because I knew Elaine would never support anything that took me away from her orbit. I stood in the kitchen, hands shaking as I read the words, "Congratulations, you have been awarded." I barely had time to breathe before Elaine stepped in her heels, clicking like a warning. "What is that?" she asked. Her tone already told me she believed she had a right to know. I should have walked away. I should have hidden it. But I was too proud that day, too hopeful. I handed her the letter. Her eyes moved across the page, and I saw her expression shift not with pride or surprise, but irritation. Without a second of hesitation, she tore the letter straight down the middle. The sound was loud, violent in its own quiet way. "You do not need dreams," she said. "You need to stay here and help this family." I stood frozen as the pieces drifted toward the floor like falling leaves. I looked at my father. He looked away. I learned a new type of pain that day, one that does not bruise the body but rearranges the heart. It was the same pain I felt when she told me I was not allowed to attend my freshman homecoming because dances were a distraction. The same pain when she threw out a necklace that belonged to my mother, claiming it looked cheap. The same pain when she convinced my father that I was rebellious, that I needed structure, that I was lucky she was willing to raise someone else's child. Over time, her control stopped looking like moments and started looking like a lifestyle. She controlled where I went, who I talked to, what I wore, what I studied, and eventually she controlled how my father saw me. He became her echo. He repeated her criticisms. He adopted her rules. Sometimes I wondered if he even realized he had surrendered. Elaine thrived in that surrender. She used it as fuel to expand her authority. She imposed curfews meant for 12-year-olds. She monitored my phone under the guise of safety. She inserted herself into every decision that should have belonged to me. Her favorite tactic was the guilt trap. "After everything we have done for you," she would say. After all the sacrifices, you owe us." And my father would nod as if she were speaking some sacred truth. I became small in my own home. Not unseen, but overly seen, like everything about me was under a microscope. Every word, every step, every achievement, every mistake. The more she tightened her grip, the more I learned to quiet myself. I adapted the way children adapt to storms, not by resisting, but by shrinking, by becoming weatherproof. But shrinking does not erase resentment. It only stores it. And Elaine kept giving me more to store. I carried these moments like sharp stones in my pocket. Every torn letter, every slammed drawer, every time she told me I was ungrateful, every time my father chose silence. When I turned 18, she said adulthood did not apply to me until she said so. When I turned 20, she said independence was a privilege I had not earned. When I turned 25, she said I still needed guidance, and my father listened. That was the part that hurt the most. Not Elaine, but him. The man who once carried me on his shoulders now could not look at me without looking for her approval. I learned early that some families do not break suddenly. They erode slowly, layer by layer, rule by rule, silence by silence. And I thought I had seen the worst of Elaine. I thought I understood the limits of her control, until the night I heard her planning my wedding for a future I had never agreed to, and I realized there had never been limits at all, only opportunities she had not taken yet. The micro cracks of the past suddenly formed a full picture. She had been engineering this for years, not raising a daughter, raising a possession, and now she wanted to secure that possession permanently. I left that house with the weight of 15 years pressing on my chest, but for the first time, the weight did not crush me. It sharpened me, because now I had the truth, and soon so would everyone else. The night air felt colder than it should have as I stepped off the porch and walked toward my car, as if the world itself understood something irreversible had begun. I shut the car door gently and sat in the driver's seat without turning the engine on. My hands were still trembling, not from fear now, but from the sudden clarity that followed it. I pulled out my phone and replayed the recording I had captured inside the house. Hearing their voices from the safety of my car felt surreal, almost like listening to a nightmare someone else had described. Elaine's words cut through the speakers without losing any of their venom. She will marry him whether she wants to or not. If she resists, we will take her car. She has nothing without us. Richard's silence echoed even louder. I sat back, staring through the windshield as the sky sank deeper into darkness. I knew this was big. Bigger than any argument, any punishment, any manipulation they had used on me before. This was not about control anymore. This was about ownership. My life laid out on their dinner table like a project they needed to finalize. My breath came out uneven. I gripped the steering wheel, remembering the weight of years resting behind tonight's discovery. And then my mind pulled another memory from its hiding place, sharp and unwanted. A moment from 8 months earlier. Elaine standing in the hallway as I tried to leave the house for a late shift. She had blocked my way, holding my phone in her hand. I had placed it on the counter for 2 seconds before reaching for my purse. When I turned back, she had it. She didn't hide her irritation. She gripped the phone tightly and slammed it down on the table with enough force to make the charger bounce. The phone didn't break, but something inside me did. She stared at me with that calculated stillness she used when she wanted me to feel small. "If you insist on being difficult," she said, "don't expect us to keep helping you." Behind her, my father stood, frozen eyes flickering between us, pretending he didn't see what he saw. He never intervened. He never even flinched. He just watched, waiting for the storm to pass and pretending it wasn't raining. The memory vanished as I returned to the present, gripping the phone now like it was the last solid thing in my world. The truth was undeniable. Elaine did not see me as a daughter or even a person. She saw me as an inconvenience that needed directing, a puzzle piece that must fit her blueprint, and now she believed she could seal that blueprint with a wedding ring I never asked for. I inhaled slowly, forcing my heartbeat to steady. I needed to think. I needed a plan. I opened my notes app and created a new file titled Evidence. The audio recording was the first attachment. I uploaded it to cloud storage, then saved a backup on an external drive I kept in the glove compartment. I had no idea what would happen next, but I knew enough to protect everything twice. My eyes scanned the quiet street. The houses were warm and still behind glowing windows. Ordinary families eating dinner, watching TV, laughing, living. I felt like I was sitting on the edge of a life I should have had and the life I must now build on my own. I started the car. I didn't know exactly where I was driving, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was not staying in that house tonight. I drove 2 neighborhoods over and parked near the home of Walter and Nancy, longtime neighbors who had known me since childhood. They were the kind of people who remembered birthdays, sent handwritten Christmas cards, and always waved from their porch. People who still believed in respect and boundaries. I didn't knock on their door yet. Instead, I stayed in the car gathering my thoughts. I pulled up the neighborhood security app that several homes used. Our area had a shared network of doorbell cameras and driveway cameras that synced to a local safety board. Walter had once mentioned his front camera captured a wide angle of the street, including parts of our driveway. I added that to my list. Evidence needed structure, not chaos. Timelines, dates, patterns. I opened a new folder and typed timeline of control. Then I listed everything I could remember. The locked door incident, the torn scholarship letter, the slammed phone, the blocked invitations, the restrictions, the disappearances of items from my mother, the secrecy, the insistence that I needed guidance despite being a grown adult. Each detail formed a pattern, a long one, a dark one, and tonight's conversation was the culmination of it all. I leaned back and closed my eyes for a moment. The emotional undulation hit me again. Shock to fear, fear to anger, anger to clarity, clarity to resolve. I did not want revenge. I wanted freedom. I wanted the truth to be louder than their lies. I wanted to reclaim the narrative they had dictated for more than a decade. I needed a plan of action, so I created one. Step 1, collect digital evidence. Step 2, collect video evidence from neighbors. Step 3, secure my personal documents, IDs, bank statements, and employment records before Elaine could access or hide them. Step 4, relocate essential belongings to a neutral, safe location. Step 5, prepare a legal consultation at the community center downtown. I did not know exactly how to fight someone like Elaine, but I knew she valued her reputation more than anything. Exposure, not confrontation, would be the weapon. I took one more breath, then stepped out of the car and walked toward Walter's house. I knocked softly. The door opened almost immediately. Walter stood there in slippers holding a mug of tea, his eyebrows lifting in surprise. "Sarah, everything all right?" I swallowed hard. "Not yet," I said. "But it will be." That night was the beginning. The moment I stopped surviving and started planning. The moment I chose myself. The moment I understood that the only way to break free from people who weaponize love is to stop believing love should hurt. And though I didn't know it yet, everything that happened next would change not only my future, but theirs too. Walter stepped aside the moment he saw my face, that mixture of exhaustion and something sharper beneath it. He did not ask many questions, which was one of the reasons I trusted him. Some people demand explanations before offering help. Others recognize distress like a familiar language. Walter was the second kind. He guided me to the dining table while Nancy brought a glass of water before I could even sit down fully. They exchanged a glance I had seen many times between longtime spouses, the kind that meant something is wrong and we need to move carefully. I took a slow sip and steadied my breathing. I didn't tell them everything, not yet, but I told them enough. Enough for Walter's expression to shift from concern to something firmer, an older kind of protectiveness that came from his years working as a firefighter before retirement. People like him understood patterns of danger instinctively. I asked if his front camera might have picked up anything unusual from earlier that day or recent weeks. He hesitated only for a moment before pulling out his laptop and opening the neighborhood surveillance dashboard he maintained as a volunteer for the community watch group. The screen glowed between us as he typed in the timestamps. As the footage loaded, a strange twist tightened in my stomach. It felt almost unreal that I was gathering evidence against the people who raised me, people whose approval I spent years begging for in silence. The first video showed the street in front of our house. At 3:18 p.m., Elaine appeared carrying 3 large shopping bags. She looked almost cheerful, a sharp contrast to the coldness she used at home. She walked up our driveway, bags swaying, and behind her was a white sedan I did not recognize. 2 women stepped out of it carrying binders. Walter frowned. They look like consultants. Bridal, maybe. My throat tightened. The footage confirmed my fear. They were planning my wedding without me with the confidence of people deciding the color of drapes, not the future of a human being. I asked Walter to save the footage. He downloaded the clip and transferred a copy to my flash drive while also uploading it to a cloud folder labeled For Sarah. The kindness struck me harder than I expected. The next clip was from the previous day. Elaine stood in our driveway holding a garment bag, a wedding dress bag, the kind that stores something too expensive for most families to casually buy without involving the bride. She carried it into the house while talking on the phone, her face stern, her voice muffled but intense. She walked inside with the garment bag, but before the door closed, she turned and looked around the driveway as if checking whether the world was watching. That alone said everything. People who do nothing wrong do not look over their shoulder. Nancy covered her mouth. "Oh, honey, they're doing this behind your back. It is not normal." "Not at all." Her voice trembled with the outrage I had not allowed myself to feel yet. Walter saved the second clip, then the third, the fourth, the fifth. Each recording revealed more: a man carrying floral catalogs, a woman carrying decor samples, a car service dropping off boxes marked event rentals. Every piece was part of a puzzle I never agreed to be in. My phone buzzed, snapping me back to the present. It was a calendar notification from Elaine titled Sunday Dinner. She had scheduled it for the entire family. I deleted it immediately, but my hands shook slightly. Nancy noticed. "You're not safe there emotionally," she said softly. "And from the sound of it, maybe not physically either." I inhaled deeply and shifted the conversation. There was another piece of evidence I needed. Something I had seen earlier while cleaning the living room weeks ago. A binder Elaine kept under the sofa cushion where she believed no one ever checked. I used to ignore it, chalking it up to her obsession with hiding things. But now that images were forming a broader pattern, that binder became crucial. I told Walter I needed a way to retrieve it without alerting her. He thought for a moment before walking to a drawer and returning with a key that looked decades old. "This opens the gate behind your backyard," he said. "The old one. Most neighbors do not use it anymore. If you go through it, you can get into your yard without being seen from the front street." My breath caught at the unexpected generosity. He handed it to me. "You need evidence for whatever comes next. Get what you can quietly." So I drove back toward my house, stopping 3 houses away to avoid being noticed. I approached the backyard through the narrow path between fences. The key fit perfectly into the rusted gate lock. It clicked. I moved silently across the yard and slipped into the house through the side door that Richard never remembered to latch. The living room looked untouched. The quietness inside felt heavy, like the house itself knew it was holding secrets. I went straight to the sofa and lifted the cushion. The binder was still there. It was thick, heavier than I expected, filled with page protectors and tabs. My hands shook as I opened it. The first page was a wedding venue contract. Full deposit paid. My name filled in the bride section. My supposed fiancé listed below a man I barely knew. Someone Elaine once introduced as a family friend's son, as if she were offering me a business partnership instead of a relationship. The next section was worse. It contained financial notes scribbled in Elaine's handwriting referencing shared assets, insurance policies, and merging accounts. I felt the room tilt. Elaine had been planning not just my wedding. She had been planning my financial future, controlling it, mapping it, designing it around a marriage that benefited her. And then I found the section titled Behavioral Notes. It listed observations about me like I was a child requiring correction, resistant when given instructions, shows independence tendencies, prone to emotional responses, must be monitored. I closed the binder before I tore it apart. I slid it into my bag and locked the house as quietly as I entered. In my car again, the emotional undulation hit nausea, disbelief, anger, resolve. This was no longer about control. This was orchestration, a blueprint for a life built without my consent. On the drive back to Walter's, I knew one thing for certain. Evidence was no longer something I was collecting. It was something I would soon expose. This was just the beginning. 15 years is a long time to be shaped by someone else's hands, especially when those hands never leave a bruise, but somehow leave marks everywhere. As I drove away from my house with the binder on the passenger seat, memories began lining up in my mind like witnesses who had been waiting years to testify. They came back slowly at first, then all at once, flooding in with the clarity of hindsight. I always knew Elaine was controlling, but sitting in that car with physical proof beside me, I finally understood she had been engineering my life in small, incremental ways long before tonight. It started when I was 12 after my mother died. Elaine entered our home quietly, at first all smiles and soft gestures, as if she wanted to blend into the spaces my mother used to fill. She baked cookies for the neighbors, organized the pantry, rearranged the living room. It seemed helpful until she began rearranging me. The first act of control was disguised as concern. She decided I needed a stricter bedtime, not because of school or health, but because she did not want me awake when she wanted the house quiet. I remember sitting in my room at 8:30 while kids my age played outside. My father said nothing, convinced she was simply trying to bring order to a grieving home. Over time, her methods sharpened. She began silencing parts of my life she could not control. When I was 13, she turned off the internet router during a class project because she believed I was spending too much time online. She never explained how she measured too much time. She simply decided. The next morning, when my teacher asked why I had not turned in the assignment, Elaine blamed me for being irresponsible. My father nodded along as if he had rehearsed the response. That was the year my friendships began to slip through my fingers. By 14, Elaine started managing my time like a personal assistant. She made lists for me, daily schedules, reminders taped to my door about chores and expectations. Everything she asked came with a layer of emotional pressure. If I did the tasks well, she acted like she had guided me toward greatness. If I failed, she acted like I had embarrassed her personally. It wasn't punishment, it was disappointment delivered with surgical precision. When I turned 15, the manipulation grew bolder. I wanted to go to a friend's birthday party. Elaine said yes at first, then 20 minutes before I was supposed to leave, she stood in my doorway with her arms crossed. "You don't need to go," she said. "Those kids are not your future." I told her my friend was expecting me. She stared at me for a long moment, then shut the door between us. It wasn't slammed. It wasn't forceful. But it was final. She locked it from the outside. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, stunned. She left me there until the party ended and then pretended she forgot. My father apologized on her behalf, not realizing the apology meant nothing. That same year, she started controlling my clothing. She gave away half my closet to charity without asking because she said the styles were too loud, too adult, too distracting. She said a modest girl was a respected girl. My father just nodded, grateful someone else handled the parenting. When I was 16, she discovered a box of my mother's keepsakes I had hidden in the back of my closet. Letters, photos, a scarf that still smelled faintly of lavender. I came home from school to find the box empty. Elaine stood in the hallway holding a trash bag. "Those things are unhealthy attachments," she said coldly. "You need to move forward." I felt something break inside me that day. Something invisible but permanent. I searched the trash can behind the house in the dark, finding only scraps of torn letters and a photograph with the corner ripped off. My mother's handwriting gone. My father defended Elaine again, saying she meant well. I learned then that love in our house came with conditions. When I turned 17, Elaine's methods became more strategic. She wanted full control of my academic choices. I applied to several universities in secret, but one acceptance letter arrived early addressed directly to me. I was ecstatic. A full scholarship, a chance to leave. But Elaine opened the letter before I could get home. She confronted me in the kitchen holding the scholarship in her hand. Without blinking, she tore it in half, then into fourths, then into eighths. The pieces fluttered to the floor like confetti at a celebration no one wanted. "You don't need dreams," she said. "You need to stay here and help this family." The casual cruelty of it stunned me into silence. She handed me the trash can to throw away the remains. My father watched from the doorway with helpless eyes, saying nothing. It was the first time I understood he had abandoned me long before he ever stopped hugging me goodnight. At 18, I fought to attend community college. Elaine signed the enrollment form only after ensuring it kept me close enough to drive home every day. She hid the car keys twice to make me miss class. She said it would teach me responsibility. I learned instead that freedom was something I would have to steal in small pieces. When I was 19, she began tracking my spending. She criticized every purchase under the guise of budgeting. "You waste money on nonsense," she scolded. "Let me handle your finances." I refused, and that was the first time she went silent for days. Not the quiet kind of silence, the weaponized kind. The kind that made every movement in the house feel like breaking a rule. When I turned 20, she escalated again. She started controlling who I dated. She dismissed every person I introduced as immature, irresponsible, not aligned with the family's values. Eventually, I stopped introducing anyone. It was easier to be alone than to justify companionship. At 22, Elaine rearranged my work schedule by calling my employer behind my back and telling them I was overwhelmed and needed fewer hours. I lost a promotion opportunity because of it. At 24, she began checking my mail opening envelopes with the excuse that she thought they were bills. By 26, she acted as if my future belonged to her entirely. And now, at 27, she had finally crossed the one line that could never be uncrossed. She tried to choose my husband. She tried to choose my life. And she believed I would let her. The memories swirled around me as the road stretched forward. I realized then that tonight was not the start of a war. It was the end of one. 15 years of micromanipulation had built a cage I could no longer pretend was a home. And for the first time in my life, I was holding the key. The binder sat on this passenger seat like a living thing breathing beside me, each page carrying the weight of decisions made about my life without my consent. I drove slowly, almost cautiously, as if any sudden movement might set off an alarm that Elaine had installed in my destiny. Streetlights passed in long golden stripes across the windshield while I replayed every detail I had seen inside that binder. The wedding planning was not impulsive. It was systematic. A forced architecture of control disguised as family progress, and the deeper I looked, the more terrifyingly deliberate it became. The first tab was titled Venue. Not ideas, not options. A final selection. Contract signed. Deposit paid. My name typed neatly in the bride line. The man chosen for me listed like a business partner in an arranged merger. I recognized his name faintly. He was the son of someone from my father's old work circle, a man who had always spoken of family alliances the way other people spoke of holiday plans. He once shook my hand at a barbecue and told me strong women make strong households, but only when guided. I was 20, then too polite to walk away, too conditioned to shrink myself for an adult's comfort. Now, his name appeared beside mine as if I were an asset set for transfer. The payment receipts stapled behind the contract made my stomach twist. Elaine had used household funds, not illegal, not unusual, but intentional. She knew I had no legal claim to those funds. She knew I couldn't dispute a contract I hadn't signed, and she counted on my silence. The second tab was worse. Dress, try-on dates, measurements, a timeline mapped out from today until the forced wedding date. My name filled every box. I stared at the measurement sheet, the one marked Estimated Fit. Elaine had written notes beside it in red pen. Ensure gown hides weight fluctuations. Avoid styles that encourage emotional independence. My fingers tightened so hard the page crinkled. Emotional independence. She wanted a dress that symbolized obedience, a costume for a role she wrote for me. The next tab, labeled Guest List, made my chest ache in a way I didn't expect. Half the names were people Elaine liked, not people I knew. Not people who knew me, not one friend from college, not one coworker from my job, not one aunt from my mother's side. A wedding meant to celebrate my life included no one who had ever been part of it. It was an event for Elaine, not me. a ceremony to display her creation. The fourth tab was labeled Assets Alignment. At first, I did not understand why a wedding binder needed a financial strategy section. Then it clicked. Elaine had plans that reached far beyond a ceremony. There were notes about merging accounts, shifting insurance beneficiaries, and combining responsibilities under a household where neither I nor my supposed future husband held financial independence. She was planning to graft me into a system where everything I owned and earned would be accessible to her through marital extensions. She had even included a list titled Long-Term Benefits: cheaper insurance, shared mortgage, reinforced family structure, easier coordination of caregiving in the future, caregiving. I almost laughed out loud. Elaine wanted control of my future caregiving role the way caregivers are demanded, not chosen. I imagined her standing in a courtroom one day, pointing at this binder, claiming she had guided me with love and planning, and I saw myself standing powerless beside her. That vision burned into my mind. I forced myself to breathe and turned to the last section. Behavioral notes. This was not planning. This was surveillance. Everything she wrote was an instruction manual for controlling me. She had documented patterns, triggers, responses, recommendations. She wrote that I became resistant when given sudden demands, that I required structure, that independence encouraged rebellion, that emotional responses needed redirecting, that weddings serve as stabilizers for difficult adult children. Difficult adult children. She used that phrase to justify shaping my life around her version of stability. She wrote about me like I was a defective appliance needing constant recalibration. The words blurred for a second as heat rushed behind my eyes. My reflection in the car window looked unfamiliar, older somehow, the shadows from the passing streetlights cutting across my face like scars. I closed the binder gently because ripping it apart would have satisfied nothing. Evidence served best when preserved. I pulled over in a quiet street lined with old oak trees and let the weight of everything sink into my bones. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not an overprotective stepmother planning too much. This was coercion carefully disguised as tradition, a forced marriage under the veil of family improvement. And in a society where appearances mattered, Elaine had crafted a perfect shield. No bruises, no threats written plainly, just pressure, expectation, financial manipulation, and a network of people she could charm into believing she was doing what was best for me. I leaned back in the seat and let the emotional undulation wash through me. Shock, fear, anger, clarity, resolve. The pattern was becoming familiar, almost rhythmic, giving me strength through the volatility. For years, I thought the problem was me. My lack of gratitude, my emotional reactions, my inability to accept love that came in harsh forms. Now I saw the truth. I had been groomed into compliance, and tonight I had snapped free just long enough to see the cage from the outside. I opened my phone and began organizing digital photographs of the binder pages. I took each one carefully, ensuring the timestamps captured the moment. If Elaine tried to steal or destroy the binder later, I would still have every page. I also recorded a video of myself describing what I found, speaking calmly, slowly, clearly, so I had a real-time record. Not for revenge, for safety. I uploaded the files to 3 different cloud drives. Redundancy was protection. I knew Elaine well enough to anticipate her mistakes. I also knew her well enough to anticipate her next steps. She would present the wedding plans publicly on Sunday evening. She would leverage family opinion. She would frame it as joyful news. She would corner me into agreeing by placing me in a room full of people who expected compliance. A room where saying no would make me the villain. She wanted social pressure to replace physical pressure. A clever tactic, a cruel one. But now that I had the evidence, now that I understood the full reach of her plan, her advantage was dissolving. My life was not a stage for her performance. And on Sunday, she would learn that the person she spent 15 years shaping into silence had finally learned how to speak. The forced wedding was no longer a threat. It was a line she had crossed. And I was going to expose every step she took to get there. I drove slowly back toward Walter's house, the binder heavy in my bag like a silent witness that had waited years to finally speak. But evidence alone was never enough. Elaine lived off appearances, reputation control, layered beneath politeness. To beat someone like her, I knew I could not react loudly. I could not rage confront or threaten. People like her thrived on painting the other person as emotional or unstable. No, I needed quiet strategy, the kind that moved without noise but with absolute precision, the kind that left no room for her to twist reality. When I arrived at Walter's, he and Nancy were still sitting at the table, their faces soft with worry. I assured them I had everything I needed for the night. I did not tell them everything yet. The less they knew now, the safer they would be if Elaine tried to manipulate or question them later. I went to the spare bedroom Walter offered and shut the door gently behind me. The small room smelled faintly of lavender and dust, a comforting mix that made me feel safe enough to finally breathe. I slid the binder onto the bed and sat across from it. Step 1, protect my evidence. It had to exist in multiple places. I connected the flash drive Walter had given me earlier and began transferring everything: the audio recording, the video clips, the photos of the binder pages, my real-time video testimony. I then encrypted a folder on my laptop, uploaded everything to 2 cloud services, and emailed a copy to a private account no one else knew existed. I even scheduled an automatic send of the files to Walter's email in 72 hours if I did not cancel it. Protection meant preparation. Once everything was safely replicated, I reached for my phone and opened a new note titled Legal Pathways. I listed questions I needed answered. Could forced marriage be reported? Could coercion be documented legally? What about misuse of shared household funds? Did I have rights over my personal property still in the house? Could I file a protective request based on emotional manipulation and control? The list grew quickly, too long for me to answer alone. So I searched for resources near me, and one name stood out: Community Legal Aid Center. Free consultations on family intimidation, coercion, and financial control. I booked an appointment for the next afternoon under a false name and left minimal details, just enough for them to know I needed help. Step 2, secure my personal documents. The house was dangerous, but every identification card, birth certificate, and bank statement still lived inside it. Elaine would weaponize them if she sensed rebellion. She believed documentation belonged to the person who held it, not the person it named. So I planned to retrieve everything early the next morning using the back gate again. I listed every document I needed and created a checklist. Step 3, move my valuables to safety. Not many things in that house belonged solely to me anymore, not emotionally at least. But a few objects held meaning beyond Elaine's reach. My mother's jewelry pieces I salvaged after Elaine destroyed the box photographs I hid in the lining of a suitcase, small gifts from friends that marked milestones she never approved of. These items needed to be placed somewhere Elaine could never find them. Step 4, emotional insulation. Not everyone thinks of this, but it mattered. Elaine was a master at emotional ambush. She could twist a question into an accusation, turn silence into guilt, turn a simple boundary into proof of disloyalty. I needed my mind shielded from her influence. That meant limiting contact, no answering calls, no responding to messages, no letting her voice seep into my strategy. I blocked both her number and my father's, temporarily saving the messages automatically so I could use them later if they became threatening. Step 5, prepare for Sunday. The ambush dinner. That was the moment Elaine would announce the engagement. That was the moment she would force the room into compliance and corner me into silence. And that was the moment I would expose everything. Not with rage, not with chaos. With calm, with facts, with recordings, with video, with the binder. With witnesses who had no reason to lie for me, but every reason to tell the truth. Quiet exposure was louder than any confrontation. Step 6, gather allies, but choose selectively. I reached out to one cousin Megan, someone Elaine hated because she was too outspoken, too independent, too unafraid of conflict. I sent Megan a short message. I need you at Sunday dinner. It is important. No details. Details would put her in danger if Elaine sensed anything. She responded instantly. I will be there. Say no more. That was enough. Step 7, understand Elaine's motives fully. It was not just about marriage. It was about ensuring I stayed under her control. Marriage was a tool, a mechanism, a way to bind me legally, emotionally, financially, a way to remove my independence permanently. When she introduced me to that man months ago, it was not a coincidence. It was premeditation, a soft launch for a future she had already drafted. Understanding her motives allowed me to anticipate her next steps. If she sensed rebellion, she would escalate. She would guilt-trip my father. She would call relatives. She would frame me as unstable or ungrateful. She would fabricate just enough to make herself appear reasonable, and that was why I could not slip. Not once. Not ever. Quiet strategy meant patience, precision, calm. I looked over the timeline I created and realized something profound. Everything Elaine taught me in the past 15 years, everything she used against me, discipline, silence, predictability, emotional restraint I could now use against her. People who rely on predictable control cannot handle unpredictable truth. Step 8. Rehearse. I stood in front of the mirror and practiced speaking in a steady tone, not shaking, not emotional, not pleading. I practiced the sentences that would dismantle her narrative on Sunday. I practiced the moment I would play the recording, the moment I would lay the binder on the table, the moment I would look her in the eyes and refuse to comply. Step 9. Create an escape plan for after the dinner. Exposure would free me, but Elaine would not let go quietly. I arranged to stay with a coworker for a week after the confrontation. She agreed instantly, offering her spare room with no questions asked. I packed a bag discreetly. Essentials only. Step 10. Choose myself. This step felt strange to write, but I wrote it anyway, because everything Elaine did for 15 years had trained me to choose her comfort over my freedom. Tonight, in a small lavender-scented room with a binder of stolen choices on the bed beside me, I finally realized choosing myself was not rebellion. It was survival. As I lay down staring at the ceiling, the emotional undulation washed over me again, softer than before. Fear, anger, clarity, resolve. But now, something new found its place in the rhythm. Power. Quiet power. The kind that grows not from noise, but from certainty. And I slept, knowing that on Sunday, Elaine would discover the daughter she raised to be silent had learned to speak with undeniable truth. Sunday arrived with a quiet heaviness, the kind that seeps into every hour, even when nothing visible is happening. I woke early in the lavender-scented guest room and lay still for several minutes listening to the low hum of the ceiling fan and the distant sound of someone mowing their lawn. The world outside felt ordinary, but inside me was a steady drumbeat of preparation. The dinner trap was coming, the ambush. The moment Elaine had been building toward with the confidence of someone who believed she could bend reality to her will. I moved slowly through the morning, packing my bag, checking my files, rehearsing the lines in my head. Calm, even tone. No raised voice, no panic, no giving her space to twist my reaction. By the time I left Walter's house, the sun hung low, warm but dim, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. I drove without music, letting silence sharpen my focus. I arrived at my childhood home exactly at 6:30, the time Elaine set for dinner. Cars filled the driveway and lined the street. Relatives I had not seen in months, sometimes years, were already stepping inside. The porch lights glowed warmly, as if this were a celebration with good intentions, not a staged performance to lock me further into their expectations. I paused at the gate and reminded myself of the strategy observe. First react, later. Inside the house, everything was arranged too perfectly. The dining room table was decorated with candles, arranged flowers, polished silverware, and folded napkins in shapes Elaine used only when she wanted to show off to outsiders. She rushed toward me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sarah, finally. Everyone's waiting. Her voice had that tone she used whenever she wanted the world to believe we were close. It sounded warm, but held an undercurrent of command. My father hovered behind her shoulders, tense eyes darting around the room like he was waiting for something to go wrong. I scanned the table quickly. Everyone was there. My aunt and uncle, my cousins, some neighbors, even people whose names I barely remembered. And at the seat next to mine sat the man Elaine intended me to marry, wearing a polite smile and a pressed shirt. Not a friend, not a partner, just another prop in her story. The room buzzed with small talk as I took my seat. I could feel Elaine watching me the way someone watches a door they want to keep shut. She needed control. She needed the right moment. And when she found it, she tapped her spoon against her glass and stood tall at the head of the table. Her smile widened. "Tonight," she announced, "we have wonderful news to share." The room quieted instantly. I felt the first ripple of tension move through my body, but I steadied my breathing. Elaine placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture meant to look loving. It felt like a claim. "Our Sarah," she continued, "has reached a beautiful milestone in her life, and we are proud to finally tell you that she is taking the next step of adulthood." The man next to me straightened in his chair. A few relatives leaned forward with excitement, and then Elaine said it. "She is engaged." The room erupted in applause. My heart did not race. It slowed. My strategy required stillness. I looked around at the faces glowing with false joy at people celebrating something I had not chosen. I lifted my hand slightly, signaling I wanted to speak. The table fell silent. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. And then I reached into my bag. Before I spoke, I took out my phone. My voice came out steady, calm, measured. "I am not engaged," I said. Elaine's smile cracked slightly like a porcelain mask hit by a hairline fracture. She laughed nervously. "Oh, sweetheart, don't be shy." I pressed play on the recording. Her voice filled the dining room with a cold clarity. "She will marry him whether she wants to or not. If she resists, we will take her car. She has nothing without us." The room froze. Forks stopped mid-air. Chairs shifted. Several relatives looked horrified. The man beside me lowered his hands from the table, his expression stiff. I let the recording continue. "Then she will learn not to," and the sound of the glass breaking echoed hauntingly through the speakers. My father's voice followed. "She fought back last time." Elaine's face lost all color. She reached for the phone, but I stepped back. No raised voice, just quiet authority. "I'm not done." Next, I placed the binder on the table. The room inhaled collectively as I opened it to the venue contract. My name typed in without consent. More pages turned. Financial plans, insurance notes, behavioral evaluations written like a report on a person who wasn't even human. I could feel the emotional undulation move through the room now. Shock, confusion, anger, recognition. I lifted my voice just enough to carry. This wasn't a celebration. This was a decision made without me, a life built without my consent, a marriage planned for control, not love. This, I tapped the binder gently, is not family. A voice from the far end of the table whispered, "Oh, my God. Sarah." Then Walter, who had quietly slipped in through the kitchen doorway, stepped forward when I glanced at him. He cleared his throat. "I have video from my camera that shows consultants arriving at the house. Dress bags, planning meetings, everything she described checks out." Elaine snapped. "Stay out of this," but the room had already turned against her. Someone murmured, "You planned this behind her back." Someone else said, "This is manipulation." My father looked devastated, lost, like someone waking up too late to stop something already in motion. Elaine reached for the binder again, but a cousin blocked her hand. "Enough," they said. "You can't twist this." The room cracked open. Control dissolved. This was the moment I had prepared for. I stood tall, my voice low but steady. "You did not protect me. You tried to choose my life for me. But tonight I am choosing myself." I closed the binder slowly. I slid my phone back into my bag, and without waiting for permission, I walked out. No yelling, no chaos. Just quiet dignity cutting louder than any accusations ever could. Behind me, I heard only one sentence whispered through the stunned room. "She's finally free." The moment I stepped away from the table, the room behind me cracked open like something under pressure finally giving way. I didn't leave the house immediately. I stood in the hallway by the staircase, breathing slowly, letting the tension drain from my hands. The quiet here felt different, not the oppressive kind that followed years of control, but a stillness filled with new understanding. Behind me, faint voices began to rise from the dining room like waves crashing against a shore. Some whispered. Some demanded answers. Some spoke in sharp, stunned tones, and I knew I needed to return. Not for Elaine, not for my father, but for myself. For the 12-year-old girl who lost her mother and gained someone who rewrote her life piece by piece. For the teenager locked in her room while laughter faded outside. For the young woman whose dreams were torn into confetti and swept away. I turned back toward the dining room. When I walked in again, every conversation died instantly. The room paused like a photograph. My relatives watched me with a mixture of shock, sympathy, and anger, none of it directed at me. The binder still lay open on the table like a body of evidence displayed in a courtroom. My father sat slumped in his chair, staring down at his hands as though he didn't recognize them anymore. Elaine, on the other hand, stood rigid at the head of the table, trembling not with fear, but with rage, contained so tightly that it nearly vibrated through the room. She opened her mouth to speak first. I beat her to it. "Nobody is confused about what happened here tonight," I said, my voice calm but carrying. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan built on controlled secrecy and decisions made about my life without me. A murmur rolled through the table. Elaine's lips pressed into a thin line. She tried again. "You are humiliating me in front of our family." I met her gaze steadily. "No. You humiliated yourself when you planned a wedding for someone who never agreed to be a bride." The man Elaine chose for me looked pale, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "I am so sorry," he whispered. "I had no idea she did this behind your back." Elaine snapped her head toward him. "Do not apologize to her. You two were supposed to build a life together. You should be supporting me." He stood up quickly. "Supporting coercion is not something I do." The room gasped softly. A ripple of acknowledgement passing without a word. I took a breath and placed my hands on the back of an empty chair, grounding myself. "I want everyone to understand something clearly," I said. "This wasn't about marriage. It was about control. About designing a life for me while pretending it was for my benefit." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The recording had done the shouting for me. One of my aunts leaned forward, shaking her head. "How could you do this, Elaine, forcing your stepdaughter into a marriage? Planning her life like a contract." Elaine laughed a sharp, brittle sound. "You all are overreacting. I was helping her. She has always needed guidance. She makes reckless decisions. She doesn't think things through. I was preventing her from ruining her future." I tilted my head slightly, studying her. "You mean preventing me from choosing anything you couldn't control?" Her face hardened. I stepped closer to the table. "Let me be clear. Guidance is support. Control is silence. Everything you did for 15 years wasn't love. It was ownership disguised as responsibility." My father finally lifted his eyes, and the grief in them made my chest tighten. "Sarah, I didn't know the extent I held up a hand. You didn't want to know. That's how this lasted." Elaine spun toward him, voice shaking. "Don't you dare pretend you weren't involved. You agreed with every decision I made. You said she needed structure. You signed every document." "You—" My father flinched. She pushed back her chair so suddenly the legs scraped loudly against the floor. That was when the room shifted from shock to exposure. "You think you're some hero now?" she spat at me, showing recordings. "Turning family against me after everything I've done for you. You wouldn't survive without me." I felt a strange calm settle in my body. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't anger. It was truth. "I survived you," I said softly. And the room fell silent again, the kind of silence that feels like the first breath after being underwater too long. One cousin spoke from the far end. "This isn't parenting, Elaine. This is manipulation." Another added, "Planning a wedding for someone without asking them is disturbing." Walter, standing near the doorway with his arms crossed, nodded once. "And when you add the controlling behavior and comments from the recording, I'd be concerned too." Elaine bristled, her voice rising despite herself. "You all think she's a victim. She is dramatic. She exaggerates everything. If she didn't resist so much, none of this would be necessary. The word necessary hung in the air like smoke. I straightened. Locking me in my room was that necessary, tearing my scholarship necessary, micromanaging my college classes, checking my mail, choosing my clothes, choosing my job, choosing my future, choosing my husband. Elaine's mouth opened and closed, but no words escaped. She looked like a person finally seeing the edges of her own reflection, sharp, cold, undeniable. My voice softened. You didn't raise me. You managed me. And management isn't love. The emotional undulation swept through the room again. Shock, discomfort, realization. I knew this was the moment the story shifted. Not because I won, but because the truth was louder than her narrative for the first time. I took a slow breath. I want everyone here to understand something. Tonight isn't about punishing Elaine. It's about ending the pattern, the controlling, the secrecy, the coercion, the silence. I'm done living a life someone else scripted. I'm done being the daughter she wanted instead of the woman I am. Elaine stared at me with a mixture of disbelief and fury, but beneath it, fear. Real fear because exposure was the one thing she could not control. My father whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry." I nodded faintly but did not respond. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I stepped back from the table. This dinner was meant to trap me, but instead it freed me, and I walked out again this time not escaping but claiming the doorway as mine. Behind me, someone whispered the sentence that felt like a verdict written in truth. She told the truth, and you can't take that back. The exposure was complete. The room would never see Elaine the same way again, and neither would I. The moment I stepped outside the dining room for the second time, the air in the hallway felt different, almost lighter, as if the house itself exhaled after years of holding its breath. I stood near the entryway, my hand resting on the cool wood of the banister, and listened as the sound behind me shifted from fragmented whispers to something heavier, more irreversible. Elaine's voice rose sharply, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. She was unraveling, not because she felt remorse, not because she understood the magnitude of what she had done, but because she had lost control. For people like Elaine, losing control was a kind of emotional freefall. And this was her first taste of gravity. I stayed where I was, not hiding, not retreating, simply giving myself space to breathe. The chandelier overhead reflected softly against the polished floor, and for the first time in years, I noticed the cracks in the walls. Hairline fractures creeping up from the baseboards, small enough to ignore, large enough to reveal years of stress. It felt symbolic, like the house itself mirrored the family inside. It held together by paint and pretense, with deeper damage no one wanted to acknowledge. Then, I heard my father's voice. It was quiet, strained, the sound of someone realizing too late what they had allowed to happen. "Elaine, stop. Please." His words only fueled her panic. She was pacing now. I could hear the sharp click of her heels against the hardwood floor. She was demanding answers, searching for someone, anyone to blame besides herself. She accused relatives of taking my side. She accused Walter of conspiring. She accused the man she tried to pair me with of betrayal. Anyone but herself. When her voice cracked again, this time louder, I stepped back into the doorway, not to confront her, but because I needed to witness the truth of the moment. The room had shifted. People who once deferred to her now recoiled. Aunts who once complimented her efficiency stared at her as if seeing a stranger. Cousins who once believed she was holding the family together now understood she had in fact been tightening her grip around one person until they could no longer breathe. Elaine turned toward me, eyes sharp with disbelief that I dared return. "You ruined everything," she said, each word punctured with panic. "You embarrassed this entire family. You embarrassed me." I met her gaze steadily. No raised voice, no trembling, just clarity. I exposed the truth. If the truth embarrasses you, that says everything. A collective quiet settled over the table. Someone whispered, "She's right." Someone else murmured, "This went too far." My father stood slowly, hands trembling at his sides. His voice shook. "Sarah, I should have protected you. I should have seen what was happening. You should have wanted to see, I said softly. His eyes glistened with a grief I wasn't ready to accept or comfort. The years of silence between us were not accidental. They were choices, small ones, stacked together until they became a wall. Elaine spun toward him, disbelief in her tone. You're taking her side. Now. After everything I've done. My father exhaled shakily. What you did wasn't parenting. It was control, and I let it happen. Elaine's face changed then, not softened, not repentant, but fractured. Her certainty, the foundation she stood on for 15 years, cracked beneath her feet. She stepped forward, pointing at me. You owe me gratitude. I held this family together. I made you who you are. A subtle shift rippled around the table, disgust, disappointment, realization. I looked directly at her. You made me afraid. You made me small. You made me doubt my own voice every time I tried to use it. The silence that followed was suffocating in its truth. My aunt leaned forward, eyes narrowed. Forcing someone into a marriage is not love. That's control. That's coercion. Another relative nodded. She crossed a line. A big one! Elaine stared at them, stunned that the room she once commanded had turned against her. She tried to defend herself again. You're all misunderstanding. You're all letting her twist this. But her hands shook. Her voice wavered, and her once flawless composure crumbled piece by piece. This wasn't rage. This was collapse. Psychological collapse. Social collapse. The collapse of her carefully curated reputation. I stepped closer to the table and closed the binder. The sound echoed in the quiet room. This is over, I said. I am not staying here. I am not living under your plans, and I am not letting you decide my future ever again. My father took a slow breath. Sarah, if you need space, if you need distance, I understand. I didn't respond. The grief between us was too fresh, too tangled. He would have to rebuild that bridge if he wanted one, and this time he would have to build it from his side. Elaine looked around the room, desperately searching for even one person to support her, to echo her narrative, to shield her from the truth pressing in from all sides. No one did. Even the man she picked for me shook his head slightly. I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't be part of something that takes away someone's autonomy. Elaine's mouth fell open slightly, a final crack in a structure already breaking apart. Then she sank into her chair, not gracefully, not stoically, but like someone whose strength had been borrowed and was finally returned. For a long moment, no one spoke. No one moved. The quiet was almost painful. I turned away from the table and lifted my bag. My father whispered my name, but I kept walking. At the doorway, I paused, not to look back at Elaine, but to take in the room one final time. The perfect decorations, the arranged flowers, the polished table, the illusion of family unity, all of it built on silence. And tonight, that silence shattered. My voice may not have been loud, but it was enough. I stepped outside into the cool evening air. The porch light cast a soft glow on the walkway, and for the first time, I realized something profound. This house had never been my home, only the place where my story was held hostage. As I walked toward my car, I heard the door close behind me. No shouting, no chasing, no one trying to stop me. Just the quiet sound of a chapter ending. The collapse was complete. Not mine, hers. And I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. The night air met me like a quiet witness, cool against my skin and steady in a way the last 15 years had never been. I stood at the bottom of the porch steps for a moment, letting the weight of the house fall off my shoulders one layer at a time. Every inhale felt like reclaiming something I didn't know had been taken. Every exhale felt like letting go of something I had been forced to carry. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel watched. I did not feel evaluated. I did not feel managed. I felt myself. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and rested my forehead against the steering wheel. Not crying, not shaking, just grounding. The kind of grounding that comes after a storm when the sky has not yet decided whether it wants to clear or rain again. I didn't drive away immediately. I needed a moment to understand the shape of what came next. Up until now, everything had been about uncovering, exposing, defending. But the next chapter wasn't about Elaine, or her plans, or her control. It was about me, my boundaries, my life, my freedom. I straightened slowly and glanced back at the house. Through the window, I could see figures moving slowly, quietly. The illusion of family unity had cracked tonight, and everyone was trying to understand where they stood among the ruins. But that was no longer my responsibility. My phone buzzed, a message from my father. It was short. "Please, talk to me. Just once." I stared at it, my emotions tugged in two directions. One part of me felt the old instinct to rush back to comfort, to mend, to soften the blow of truth. But the other part, the part of me that finally understood boundaries, stayed still. I typed back slowly. "We will talk, but not tonight, and not at the house." Then I added something I never dared say before, and not with Elaine present. His read receipt appeared almost instantly. Then 3 dots. Then nothing. I set the phone aside and finally drove away. I went back to Walter's house where the porch light was still on, as if they expected I'd return. Walter opened the door before I could knock. His expression said everything. "Are you all right?" I nodded. "Not fully, but enough." Nancy gave me a soft smile and handed me a warm cup of tea. No questions, no pressure, just presence. And that alone felt like healing. I slept there that night, not deeply, not peacefully, but safely. Sometimes safety is enough. The next morning, sunlight peeked through the blinds, warmer and gentler than anything I'd felt in days. I sat up slowly and reached for my phone. No missed calls from Elaine. Dozens from my father. 2 from cousins offering support. 1 from the man Elaine tried to pair me with, apologizing again for being part of her plan unknowingly. And 1 from Megan, proud of you. Let me know when you want to talk. I smiled softly at that. Kindness lands differently when you aren't used to it. I spent the morning packing. Not from my childhood home, I wasn't going back there for a while. Instead, I packed the small bag I brought the night before, double-checking that all the evidence was still secure in my laptop and flash drives. This bag wasn't for escaping. It was for restarting. I drove to meet my father at the community park in an open area where Elaine couldn't intrude or listen. He was already there, sitting on a bench under a maple tree, hands clasped together, shoulders sagging. When he saw me, he stood quickly, guilt and relief battling in his expression. "Sarah," I held up my hand, gently stopping him before he could drown the moment in apologies. "We can talk," I said quietly. "But I need you to listen first." He nodded, his eyes glassy. I sat beside him, leaving a small space between us that symbolized more than I could say out loud. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I didn't crumble. I spoke, clearly, calmly, honestly. 15 years of manipulation. 15 years of silence. 15 years of watching him step aside while Elaine stepped in. I did not sugarcoat. But I did not punish. I simply spoke the truth. And he listened. Really listened. For the first time, I saw him not as the man who failed to protect me, but as the man who now understood what his silence cost. When I finished, he wiped his eyes. "I failed you," he whispered. "I should have seen it. I should have stopped it. I should have chosen you." I let the words sit in the air. They didn't fix anything, but acknowledgement matters. I took a slow breath. "I'm willing to rebuild something with you. Maybe. But with boundaries. Clear ones." His eyes lifted, hopeful and fearful at the same time. What kind of boundaries? I spoke steadily, even though my heart trembled. No contact with Elaine regarding me. No decisions made for me. No access to my documents, my accounts, or my plans. Weekly calls only if they're respectful. And if you want to see me, it has to be alone. No ambushes, no pressure, no manipulation. He nodded immediately, almost too quickly, as if afraid I'd take the offer away. "I accept all of that. I truly do." I believed him, not because he said it, but because something in him had shifted. Maybe seeing the truth exposed publicly forced him to confront the parts of himself he had ignored. Maybe he was finally ready to step into the role he left empty for too long. I stood. "I think we're done for today." He nodded again, and before I walked away, he asked quietly, "Can I hug you?" I paused. Boundaries didn't mean pushing everyone out. They meant choosing who and how they could come in. So I nodded once, allowing a gentle, brief embrace. Then I stepped back, reclaiming my space. The next days moved like slow waves, calm, then emotional, then calm again. I found a temporary place to stay with my coworker. I organized my next steps. Legal consultation, housing change, job adjustments, and healing. Quiet, steady. Real healing, not the kind that pretends pain never happened, but the kind that grows from acknowledging it. I didn't contact Elaine. I didn't unblock her. I didn't engage. That silence was the loudest boundary of all. One afternoon, while unpacking my bag in the spare room at my coworker's house, I looked at the binder one last time. I didn't feel fear or anger, just realization. This binder didn't hold my life. It held her version of it, and I wasn't living in that version anymore. I closed it gently, placed it inside a sealed box, and wrote one sentence on the lid. Not my story. Not anymore. For the first time in my life, the future felt like something I could reach without permission. Boundaries didn't make my world smaller. They made it mine. The morning I finally moved into my own apartment felt quieter than any morning I could remember. Not empty, not lonely, just quiet in the way a blank page is quiet before the first stroke of ink. My new place was small, a one-bedroom on the third floor with old hardwood floors and a window that caught the late afternoon light in a warm golden spill. It smelled faintly of fresh paint and possibility. I stood in the center of the living room with my hands still wrapped around the last box I carried inside, absorbing every detail. No footsteps behind me. No voice correcting, directing, or questioning. No one deciding whether this apartment was good enough or appropriate or aligned with some invisible expectation. Just me. And that alone was beautiful. I set the box down and exhaled in the kind of way you exhale after realizing you have been holding your breath for 15 years. The silence did not hurt. It healed. I made myself a cup of tea, something simple, something steadying, and sat on the floor since my couch had not arrived yet. Through the window, I could see a sliver of the street, the passing cars, the normalcy of people living lives without the weight of someone else scripting them. For the first time in forever, I felt part of that normalcy too. My phone buzzed. A message from Megan. "Proud of you." "How does freedom feel?" I typed back. Strange. Quiet. Real. She sent a heart. Sometimes a heart is enough. Another message came in, this one from my father. "Can we have our weekly call tonight?" "Any time is fine." I read it twice. Not out of suspicion, but because it felt foreign to be asked instead of dictated to. It felt like respect, tentative but genuine. I replied, "Yes, 30 minutes." The rest of the afternoon I unpacked slowly, not rushing to make the space perfect, just letting it take shape at its own pace. A framed photo of my mother went on the windowsill, a stack of books on the nightstand, clothes neatly folded into drawers, each item placed where I wanted it, not where someone insisted it belonged. As the sunlight faded, I lit a small lamp and sat again on the floor with my tea, letting the room settle around me. When my father called, his voice was steadier than it had been in weeks. He asked how the move went. He told me he had begun therapy, that it was challenging but necessary. He said he was willing to keep all the boundaries we discussed, even the ones that stung his pride. And then he said something I did not expect. "I want to earn my relationship with you, not inherit it." The words landed gently, surprising me with their sincerity. I told him I appreciated the effort, and for the first time, I actually meant it. The call ended without tension or guilt, just a simple goodnight between two people trying to rebuild something honest. Afterward, I sat alone in the living room again, noticing how calm the quiet felt. No fear, no dread, no waiting for the next moment of escalation, just stillness. My laptop pinged with a notification. Walter had emailed me a copy of the footage one last time, along with a simple message. "You did good, kid. Proud of you." I smiled because I realized something. Throughout my childhood and young adulthood, I thought family was something fixed, assigned, unchangeable. I thought loyalty required endurance even at the cost of myself. But tonight, in this tiny apartment with the sound of traffic humming softly through the window, I finally understood the truth. Family is not who shares your last name or your bloodline. Family is who shows up, who listens, who protects your peace instead of stealing it, who does not lock your door or break your things or design your life like a puppet show. Family is chosen, built, earned, and I was finally free to choose. Later that week, I met with the lawyer assistant again to close the loop on a few matters. They reviewed the documentation I had gathered, affirming that I acted lawfully at every step, that the evidence was clear, that the boundaries I set were reasonable and justified. They asked if I planned to pursue any civil action regarding the forced wedding arrangement or coercive behavior. I thought about it carefully, and then I shook my head. No, exposure was enough. The truth had already done the work. Elaine's social standing had collapsed without me lifting a finger. My father had stepped out of her shadow. Their community whispered. Her friends distanced themselves. Her influence evaporated. Consequences do not always need punishment. Sometimes they simply need light. I walked home from the meeting through the late autumn air, crisp and cool, the kind of weather that makes your lungs feel clear. At a stoplight, I watched families crossing the street, some talking, some laughing, some arguing in light-hearted ways. None of them looked perfect, but none of them looked trapped either. I wondered what my life might have been if my mother had lived. If Elaine had never entered the picture. If I had been allowed to grow without being sculpted into a version someone else preferred. But regret is only useful if it teaches, and what it taught me was simple. You can mourn the childhood you deserved while still building the adulthood you choose. When I reached home, I opened my laptop and created a new document titled My Life Not Theirs. Inside, I wrote a list, not of tasks, but of truths. I am allowed to make my own decisions. I am allowed to speak without fear. I am allowed to leave any room where I am disrespected. I am allowed to learn, dream, move, explore. I am allowed to not explain myself. I am allowed to build a life that looks nothing like the one they tried to force on me. And then I added one final line. I am allowed to be free. Weeks passed. The apartment filled slowly with furniture plants' color. My confidence returned in pieces like stepping stones across a river. My father kept his promises. Weekly calls, respectful, boundaried, sometimes emotional, sometimes awkward, sometimes refreshing, but always honest. Elaine never reached out. Silence can be a weapon, but her silence felt like surrender. I did not chase it. I did not fear it. I simply moved forward. One afternoon, while arranging books on a new shelf, I found the binder again in the sealed box where I had stored it. I lifted it gently, feeling its weight. Not physical weight. Symbolic. I opened it one last time, flipping through the pages that once defined the plan others tried to impose on my life. Contracts, names, dates, decisions made without me, narratives written over me. None of it had power anymore. I closed the binder, walked to the shredder I borrowed from my coworker, and fed the pages through one by one. Not in anger, in closure. When the last paper dissolved into thin strips, I felt a lightness I had never felt before. Not revenge, not victory, just freedom. Pure, quiet, undeniable. That night, sitting on my new couch with a cup of tea, I whispered something into the stillness of my apartment. Not a declaration, not a vow, just a truth. Family is who treats your life like it belongs to you. And I finally had that now. For myself, for my future, for the girl I used to be and the woman I was becoming. If someone asked me today what changed everything, I would not say the recordings or the dinner confrontation or the exposure. I would say the moment I realized I had the right to walk away. That was the real turning point, the spark that lit the path forward. So to anyone watching my story, anyone who has ever been silenced or controlled or shaped into something that was never theirs to become, I would say this: freedom begins the moment you decide your life is yours. And once you choose yourself, truly choose yourself, the world has no choice but to adjust. You are not alone. You are not trapped. You are not powerless. You are simply at the start of your real life, like I was, like I am. And as I turn off the light in my apartment and step into a future I finally get to create, I know one thing with absolute clarity. The story they wrote for me is over. The story I write for myself is just beginning. If you stayed with me until the end of this story, thank you. Stories like this are not just stories, they are mirrors. They reflect the quiet ways control can slip into someone's life, the subtle forms of pressure that disguise themselves as love, and the strength it takes to finally step into your own freedom. If anything in Sarah's journey spoke to you, touched you, or made you think of someone you know, I want to invite you to take a moment right now and tell me your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what part hit the hardest. Tell me what moment made you pause. Tell me whether you have ever witnessed a situation where someone was quietly controlled or pushed into choices that were not theirs. And if you are comfortable, tell me the city or state you are watching from. Our community is built by people from everywhere, and seeing those locations appear reminds us that we are connected, that no one is standing alone in their experiences. Your voice matters here, and your perspective helps shape the stories we continue to tell. If you believe in justice, boundaries, personal growth, and the courage it takes to reclaim your own life, please tap the subscribe button. It helps the channel grow and helps these stories reach more people who might need them. And if you found value in Sarah's strength, leave a like. It takes only a second, but it encourages us to keep writing stories that empower, challenge, and resonate with audiences who know that family is not just DNA. Family is respect, choice, and the freedom to live life on your own terms. You can also share this video with someone who loves narrative storytelling or someone who might see themselves in this journey. You never know who might feel seen or understood because of a story like this. And before you go, one more thing. Remember that this is fictional storytelling created purely for entertainment, reflection, and emotional exploration. None of the characters or events are based on real people. These stories exist to help us think about boundaries, identity, courage, and healing in a safe and thoughtful way. I hope this one left you with something meaningful, something steady, something that stays with you long after the final sentence. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting these narratives. And thank you for giving your time to a story that at its heart is about choosing yourself. I will see you in the next video. Until then, take care of your peace, protect your boundaries, and remember that your life belongs to you.